What a topic we have to discuss today. Who has tried in any shape or form any generative AI system? But from Google, ChatGPT. I'm not really saying half of the room. Okay, not surprising. So my name is Antoine Aymer. I'm the global CTO for this amazing topic, quality engineering and testing, being in this field for probably almost 20 years and learning things every day. So with that new topic, I wanted to embark you on a journey. And this journey is deep sea exploration. For centuries, human beings have been captivated by what lies beneath the sea. We are sending vessels every year to understand what is happening and to explore further. Deep sea today is still regarded as the little known, never explored. We say that almost 25% of the beneath of the sea, the below of the sea, is actually mapped by humans, remaining 75% unknown. In the 1930s, and that's a long time ago already, two scientists, Barton and Beebe, decided to actually understand what lies beneath the sea. And they built what you can see here, which is called the bathysphere. And they built that, again, to go deep dive and understand, what lies beneath the sea. In 1934, they actually reached, with this bathysphere, 900-meter depths. This was the first time that human beings went that deep. But the experiment to get to that point was actually immense. They had a huge amount of work and time to achieve this success. In an unmanned experiment, one of the bathysphere got flooded because there are daunting pressure around that. And as we move on, I think we are equally captivated by generative AI. And the first thing I want to share with you is a personal story that happened to me 2 days ago. I was experimenting with prompt crafting, as many of you have been doing, and I had to get a coffee. One of my daughters sat at my place, and she had to research somebody called William Cornish. William Cornish, actually, is a British composer for the 15th century. So she asked the LLM, the generative AI system I was using, and then she got a response. But there are actually two William Cornish. There's a modern jurist, Australian guy, worked in the UK, and this composer from the 15th century. And the system gave back to her, it is a jurist, a legal counsel from the 15th century. Hallucination. The first thing, as we are experimenting generative AI, exactly as we explore deep sea, we need to be cautious. The first thing we have to remember is that point. All these systems are large language systems. They are not knowledge systems. So yes, they can hallucinate. And for us, the word quality matters more than the rest of the world. The second point here, that you can see here, as many of you who have experienced it already, there's no guaranteed quality outcome, as per the example I've just shared. But there's also a lot of deviation in terms of the output we are getting. If I prompt something, if I ask for something, I might not get the same level of response. Now you can think of our world, well, what we try to do in our world is to get consistent quality output for whatever we do. So as we approach generative AI, we are expecting the same methodology, the same approach. And as deep sea exploration, we have to be very cautious. There are a lot of unknowns there that we have to explore. And I want to bring you in a very concrete experiment towards generative AI applied to testing. But AI, again, is not new to us, and it was just shared before. Last year, we issued a huge report about how AI can be applied to our domain. It was an end-to-end report focused on all the various activities of QE&T. 14 of our partners, technology partners, service companies, participated to that report. Again, huge, right? But the point is that this report outlines more technical outcome And this is, by the way, all available today on sogeti.com. The focus was much more around self-healing scripts, using computer vision, how I can get predictive analytics, and more. Now, as we approach generative AI again, February, March this year, we actually took another look at all the potential use cases that lies in front of us on testing. So behind me, you have all these white boxes, and we found out that the use cases that we didn't have before in the previous report are actually new ones with generative AI. Things like test design, test strategy, test analysis, things that are a little bit more textual based. So behind each one of these boxes, we identified over 20 use cases where we as human beings and quality engineers, we are facing, we will say, issues or matters of improvement. And then what we decided, so, well, that's a lot of different use cases, these over 20 use cases. What we tried to do is map them, prioritize them, and we ended up putting this prioritization chart, which is a typical one. You have on the horizontal axis the effort required to implement that use case, and on the vertical axis, the likely of the impact, the value of that use case if we are to properly implement it. So you can see here the most interesting one, are these ones. The most valuable use cases, so requirement analysis validation, test case generation for sure, and we've got a few more. There are others that are probably a lot more complex to achieve today, but that will also require trust to implement. And that is actually the next big word. I have been involved into Gen AI and QE&T for some time now, for 6 months. And the key word that always comes back to everybody's mouth is trust. Trust in 2 different aspects. Trust into, well, where am I going to run my experiment? How can I drive it properly without exposing my data? And the second aspect is, well, how am I going to do it efficiently? Because it's about prompting now, and I'm not, expert at prompting. So really these 2 key elements always come back, trust. So the first thing we did is address the first question. So naturally we said, okay, what are our enterprise requirements with whatever tool we want to use? And you have it in my back. Things like, I want high accuracy for the tool I want to use. I want to rely on my tool. I want it to be accurate. I want it to integrate with my system. I want, and there's also new kids on the block. Attention, cost element, which is different. But also sustainability, which actually was just discussed before. So we said, okay, well, the first thing that we have access to us is the public instances of large language systems, ChatGPT, BART, and others. And then we realized that many of our use cases, well, we should not run them on these public environments because we would expose data. Yes, now they've made progress, but even though, we need to be very cautious. Some use cases could be eligible, orange flag, right, depending on your context. But what we found out is if we build a proper secure environment in a private place, such as Microsoft Azure, then we will actually comply with all of our enterprise IT requirements and safely experiment. So that's the first thing we did that I think everybody should do. Bottom line is, depending on the use case that you want to explore, you should make sure that you choose the most appropriate platform. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Architecture, trust, security is one thing. Now I want to interact with the system. I want to get things out of it. Okay, so which use case should we start from? Well, very simply, I went back to my prioritization matrix and said, okay, well, I want to actually focus on one of these use cases, and we decided to focus on going from user story to test case. Okay, how hard can it be? All right, So we created a user story, a simple one, somebody going to the cinema. This is a typical ticketing system for cinema with discount and pricing per age, discounts per time where you want to buy your ticket, so on and so forth. Okay? And we asked the system, very first question, act as a testing expert and generate a test case from that user story. And we got this. Okay, well, that looks interesting. I've got some parts here, edge-based pricing. It makes sense, time-based discounts. Okay, so we got it. However, here I got a result of 18 test cases, 12 valid and 6 invalid. But every time I was running the system, there were deviations. Nothing was the same ever again. And the verbs that we've been using, the terminology was not right. There were ambiguity in the whole output. And then it felt like it was missing the expertise that we have in testing. So however good enough the system we tried it was interesting, we felt that that is not really usable in real life. So then, well, we said, okay, well, it's a matter of prompt crafting. So we enhanced the prompt, and you can see here, first we included a title, because as a human being, I need to think to be readable, okay? Then we included a primary directive, guidelines for actions, and a bit more things like receive and analyze the user story to attract core functional requirement, and the user interaction. So we want to make sure that the AI generates a question for the user, okay? So we went from 11 words to now 93. So we got a response here. I'm not again showing it all because otherwise it's going to be too long. Bottom line is, okay, I put it like the App Store rating, 2 stars. We got a little bit more test cases, same deviation again, but there was no real formatting that I could really use. I mean, it does not comply with the way I want to see things. The verbs, the terminology was still not clear, lack of dependency between the test cases, and the boundary conditions were a bit unclear, right? So we move a little bit and explore a little bit further. So we said, well, we have to add more in the prompt, okay? And here we are. Now we have, the primary directive is a little bit better. We define what is the user story, and then we add guidelines for creating the test case. Things like boundary conditions, priority settings, but also specification for AI in terms of tone, style, response format. And again, it's a little bit more directive. I want it to be more providing consistent quality output. And now, that's 440 words. Starts to be a little bit, bigger. So we got an output, okay. The number of test cases were almost equivalent. Deviation was still the same. It's a little bit irritating, And I'm not even sharing that this actually deviates even more on other systems, okay. So behind it, I was using one specific generative AI system, but if I had to change it, it was even worse. So the output that we got was not really readable. I was actually lacking to integrate it properly. So I want a CSV file or I want an XML file to be able to import it in a system. So still better, but areas of improvement. So we actually enhanced the prompt. Okay? And now I'm reaching 1,300 words. And then it looks much better. So you can see it all. You have guidelines for test case creation, specification for AI analysis, coverage-based test design principles from TMAP guidelines. I've got final directives with some formatting stuff and more directives. Because, again, we needed to have this, because every time there was a deviation in the response, it was explaining things to me, it was providing an example. I didn't want to have that. I just want the system to be very narrowed focus on a single purpose and to give me what I want. So what I want actually was, well, look much better. So I've got my executive summary, my user story, one single user story for now. My summary, a bit of description, and the table. Okay, so the table is truncated here, so it's actually much wider here. And it actually looked fine. I had like a lot of different things, including of test data. However, you think it stops here, but it does not stop here. So if you have a look at the number of test cases diminished, it decreased. So it felt a little bit better, but in terms of coverage and accuracy of the output, it was not enough. So we tried a lot to simplify this, eliminate duplicates, and make sure we can actually tweak the wording into it to make sure that we actually comply with the requirement. And it was very difficult. So what we did is we split it into two versions. One only focusing on valid functional test cases, and another prompt on valid functional test cases. And what we found was the quality of the output was much better. Unique, clear, reusable, traceable test cases, exportable. However, it was not exhaustive enough. Much better. From the previous prompt, number 4, I got 2 invalid test cases. Now I'm getting 16. Much better. But here, it didn't feel right. So what we did is split it again. From the 12 test cases, I said, okay, well, I will convert it into 2 other prompts. One is going to be on the happy path, and one is going to be only focusing on the boundary test cases. And I get almost double that what I was getting before. Now, there's almost no deviation. Right? Sometimes I was getting 10 test cases, because it was just the way it was formatting things in terms of the test case. So it was almost the same. So no deviation, and absolutely usable, exportable, and almost exhaustive. So this is the final prompt structure that I've been using. And it looks a bit scary, but it is like us human beings. We need to be extremely accurate and rigorous in the way we want the AI to behave, inclusive of not just prompt crafting, but the domain expertise that we have in QE&T, the specific verbiage, the specific directives. So I won't go through it, and I think we have a chat later about it, and we have a booth outside. Now, what have we learned from this experiment? Very concrete. 5 things. The first one is, obviously, crafting prompts requires the artistry of language, but it also requires the accuracy, the precision, and the structure of code. We don't necessarily realize it now because it's all wording and questions, but this is what we found. We absolutely need to have the greatest accuracy of code in order to make sure that the output is consistent and of good quality. The second thing here, do not expect the LLM, the traditional LLM, to know what we know in our domain. We need to include, especially in the prompt, we need to inject our domain expertise. Tone, style, verbiage, data, we need to include it specifically, otherwise you'll get deviation. The third point here, which is a little bit scary, is that I showed you how we can derive the right consistent quality output. We need to actually be very, very specific, single purpose, when we are asking something from this system. If we're asking something too large, like generate test cases, even the best system outside are not good enough to do that. So give you an example, the test case is valid, then further split it. That's the only way we found to have consistent quality output. So now, you can think of all the things that you have to craft to derive to that point. The fourth point that you might have seen, and it's essential because we are generating real tangible value from these prompts. They are becoming intellectual properties. Truly. Like code. It's the same approach. And let's face it, our job will not change overnight. We cannot say, well, I'm focusing on quality and tomorrow I need to hire, 10 people to craft prompts. That's going to be really, really difficult. So I'm absolutely certain that we also need to rely on a low prompt, no prompt approach. where we rely on pre-crafted prompts to generate value for us. Because if we have to craft all these hundreds of prompts for us, then we lose our mind. And there's also, I've realized it as well, working on that, there's fatigue. The amount of words that you have to digest, to prompt, to read the result, validate, and do it again, this is going to be extremely dense for us. And I want to give you another very concrete example, a little bit more technical, which is one that we're working on now. How can I turn a test case into, let's say, a Selenium script? And initially, probably a few months ago, and I saw YouTube video, as you probably almost have done, said, oh, there's somebody who has created that. But again, compared to the experiment I've just shared here, it's not possible in one single prompt to do that. What we need to do is split each of the activities of the automation engineer into smaller chunks to make sure we are getting consistent quality output, which is the one thing I keep repeating. This is not a playground, this is not a toy. We need to make sure that we are focusing on quality. So here we go from, I want to make sure that my test case are properly elaborated beyond the business logic behind it. Then I want my identifiers, my object locators, so on and so forth to derive to it. And behind it, this is almost 11 steps, 11 prompts. But then you have to think of, well, what if I have to maintain all my prompts? How can I orchestrate all my prompts in a decent manner so actually I can verify that the quality is there? So again, it looks much more complex than it seems, starting very simply. And don't forget also about the cost element. And the more you use it, the less sustainable you're going to be getting. So, and this is a big play for us, because we are also responsible for all of that. What we are doing now, we are building a copilot for QE&T, where we are going to be LLM agnostic, meaning that we can integrate with any LLM. And the idea is that any of our engagements are going to bring this copilot for free in all of our services. And we are going to start releasing that tool for every engagement at the end of the year. The idea is that this copilot, we are going to inject team map knowledge, and we are going to be focusing on the use cases that would take you months to drive through prompt crafting. So we are going to pre-craft all this, injecting our domain expertise. So when it comes the time to generate test cases, instead of 3 days to few weeks, sometimes months, we are actually expediting it with this copilot. So we are focusing, because it's actually much more complex than it seems. So again, we have the humility of this whole experiment as well. So step by step, we are only focusing on, for now, in 2023, on these few use cases, and we are expanding more. All about requirement, this sequence of apparition in an agile team. So that was a lot, and that was the purpose of my talk here, is to show you in concrete aspects the complexity behind it, and this is why I use this deep sea exploration. It's the same. We have to experiment, we have unknowns, so we need to have, again, this humility of experiencing this new domain. Time for us to explore, and the thing is we have to do it together, because we are not enough. Thank you very much.